Welcome to a very special episode of the Wandering Tangent podcast, where myself and Gary are here to stage a let's call it a intervention with our good friend Jeff to confront him about his Star Trek addiction as we start a conversation with Star Trek 6, The Undiscovered Country. Now, I say this because I was thinking about this at work, because one of the benefits of working housekeeping is that you have a lot of time to think. And I thought to myself, this is like the third Star Trek movie in a relatively condensed amount of time that we've talked about. And out of, I don't even call it this year, this season of the podcast, but out of 5 movies Jeff has picked, 3 of them have been Star Trek movies.
Yeah, that's not a sign of a problem. Certainly not.
Here we are, talking about Star Trek again.
Once again. Hooray!
Yay.
Leftovers.
Look. He's got to let his, he's got to let his flag fly, and his flag obviously is the Federation flag, PJ. So, but that is a lot, Jeff. I'm very much into Warhammer 40K, and you don't see me choosing Warhammer movies all the
time. You don't see me choosing it every single time.
I actively limit myself to one Godzilla movie a year.
We all know how to say no. We all know how to dial back.
BJ, the small joke is that there are no Warhammer movies. So
actually, there is one I can think of.
You're right.
It's not very good.
It is not. So
anyway, in this particular case, Jeff, you did in fact dial it back a little bit, because the keen-memoried viewer will remember me talking about how I was not excited for the next show we're going to watch, because we were going to watch Star Trek 3, The Search for Spock. But then Jeff sent us a text saying, "Hey guys, do you mind if I like talk about Star Trek? Like, I came with answers to like some of the questions Gary had before." And we were like, "Okay, sure." And I should add that this part is sort of how it played out in my brain. So Jeff, feel free to contradict me if I'm wrong. But I see the scene as Jeff sent this text and he's like, "Oh goody, I get to talk about Star Trek some more." And he sort of stops and thinks and says to himself, they might be more receptive if I let them watch a good Star Trek movie as compared to a bad Star Trek movie. Maybe I should change what Star Trek we watch.
Better Star Trek. Yeah.
I will let them watch good Star Trek for once. Well, I say for once. The last Star Trek movie we watched was Wrath of Khan, which is maybe the best Star Trek movie? Question mark.
Yeah, possibly.
BJ, to justify your trepidation, he has chosen some very bad Star Trek before, so.
I mean, he hasn't chosen, like, the worst Star Trek. Like, we haven't watched The Final Frontier yet.
Yeah, you classify that as the worst one. Okay.
I don't think I've ever seen it, but from what I've read online, most people consider that to be the worst Star Trek movie.
Huh, interesting. I like that one.
Of course you do.
Of course I do. Of course.
Of course you do. This is my surprise face. That Jeff likes the Star Trek movie that everyone else is like, no, yeah, that's really dumb.
Yes. Okay.
The man who saw Street Fighter is like, you know what? I like this movie.
I did like Street Fighter. I thought it's good. Okay. Instead of explaining what I am, actually, which Jeff, is unexplainable. That's unknowable, really.
Jeff, I'm going to cut you off first.
Okay.
Gary,
you have that power.
Gary, is there anything you want to say before Jeff launches into his hour-long Star Trek monologue?
No, I imagine that there's going to be some discussion. I already stoked the flames in the review because I have questions that I'd like to ask. And he's going to be able to bring up his arguments from the previous discussions first. We'll discuss that, and then we can bring up the new. Then we can bring up the new business. We have to conduct the old business before we do before we deal with the new business.
Okay, so I'll, I'll let you guys do your thing. I'm gonna go sit down. I'm gonna read a book. When you guys are ready to be
You're
done,
gonna
say my name, and
they're
I
not gonna
will
let me
appear.
talk anyway. I'm just gonna go sit down and read.
Well, I got home from work like half hour ago. I turned my desk into a standing desk because it's healthier. So I'm gonna sit down for a little bit and let you guys go. And knowing me and my general history with these Star Trek discussions, I'm gonna zone out anyway. So
You're just being honest. Okay.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah. So I guess you kids have fun, and I will pop back in every now and then just to make sure you're still talking. Okay, go.
Okay. Well, the first thing I want to say is that talking about science fiction is talking about fiction. So, as a disclaimer, for all the people out there who's like, wow, this guy is a real know-it-all about something that's just supposed to be TV shows and movies, yes, this is fiction. It is only fiction. It's not meant to really tell anything that is as precise as other means would be. It's all theoretical, and it's all there just to play with ideas and to entertain and sell some tickets at the same time. So with that said, to not overdo the importance of this, one of the things that was discussed last time is that when people in the Star Trek universe seem a little unrealistic, because when you work without money, there's no way human beings would ever really do that. And in this science fiction world, they say, yes, they would. And the thing that I think that in this episode of Star Trek, one of the things they show is a kitchen where they're preparing food. And they go in, and people are actually mixing food with pots and pans and all of that. What is not explained in this film is that food is actually being manufactured by machines. They explained this in the Enterprise series that was in the early 2000s. But in Star Trek, before the time of replicators that were super fast and instantaneous, they had machines that could actually, for a kind of a nerdy way of thinking of it, it's almost like they 3D print proteins of food. They can actually do the chemical stuff that happens inside of plants and bacteria. They can synthesize all that mechanically with machines. So they take a bunch of organic leftover waste of any kind, and then through the machine, they can convert that into a food product. And in the Star Trek universe, that's why they don't have farms, even before replicators. Go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry, I just wanted to interject.
Yes.
Just want to interject so I can understand this better, right? So what you're saying is they take poop and then they
yes
3D they put it into a 3D printer and then it 3D prints out lasagna.
Okay, not quite. It 3D prints materials that then can be used to cook.
You're right. It 3D prints the noodles that go into the lasagna. Gotcha. You're right. I forgot a step. And then a fine craftsman of a cook takes the noodles and prepares them. It takes them, puts them through their final steps to prepare them for somebody to eat without getting paid. Gotcha. But that's because he feels like he is feeling fulfilled working on a starship as a cook.
I think it'd be cornstarch, Gary.
Huh?
I think it'd be corpse starch.
I'm just saying, okay, BJ, the corpses get turned into the meat that goes in the lasagna. You got to have it close.
No, they don't put people through the food processors. No, that's not a thing. They get shot out into space in torpedoes. Okay?
Or
I'm going to sit back down.
Or do they get
I am sitting down.
Or do the people get put into the worm farm and then the worms get put into the food processor?
Now, as crazy as Gary put it, and he did a good job of making it sound crazy, uh, everything that he described happens in nature. Like the things that are dropped on the prairie eventually become grass. We all know this kind of stuff, right?
Of everything, I was not expecting Jeff to go with, well, it happens in nature.
Yes, Jeff, I'm very familiar with the 3D with the food 3D printer farms that just grow in nature.
Yes.
No, I get your point, Jeff. I get your point. Like
So
there are
you
natural
have like
processes that take waste organic material and then turn it into food. It's just quite a few more steps from point A to point B, right?
Yes, and so you'll have a situation in many different episodes and films where you have a person living on a planet by themselves. All they got is a house, and you have to ask the question, how do they eat if there's no garden, if there's no farm? How do they eat? And the answer is they have machines that can handle all of that. So it can even have, if you can make proteins, then you can also make clothing. You can make a lot of things. You can even make polymers. You can do a lot of stuff to synthetically create everything that you need to survive. And so the answer to the bigger question, how this fits in, is one of the things that you talked about, is how humans couldn't be motivated to do that, which, and again, this Star Trek's theoretical, so there's no way of proving this, but the idea is that they don't use money to financially support things like building a spaceship, but there is a product that they have that they still use in a monetary-like way, and that is simply human labor. So for an organization to exist, or even for like a restaurant to exist, there has to be people who believe in it and devote their time to that project. So as long as Starfleet has enough people who believe in its mission, so much so that they will devote their time to it, even in a small facet, like just being a cook on a spaceship versus being an officer in charge of lots of stuff. If there's people that are willing to fulfill those roles, then the organization will go on, because these organizations don't need to tax materials away because they can make their own. So Starfleet doesn't need to create food. They don't need farms in order to feed them. It's not like the Romans, where the Romans needed farms in order to get enough grain and cheese to supply their legions as they cross long distances. Starfleet creates all of this, and the only thing that Starfleet needs from the Federation planets is people, human labor. That's all they need. If enough people volunteer, it will always be able to fulfill its missions. And so the technology, it doesn't need any materials. And in terms of mining, there's an episode in the original series where they have a mine, and there's a group of Federation miners who go to a planet and they mine materials from that planet. And the Enterprise has to show up and help them because there's a strange creature living in the caverns in their mind, of course. And people get destroyed by this creature. It's a big thing. But the point is that if you have enough volunteers, and the next question is how does the Federation get enough volunteers? And the answer to that is that you have to also keep in mind how many people are on all of these different planets, and how many people does the Federation really need to exist? How many officers, how many mining workers, how many cooks, how many...
So my question is what's the backside of it? Because we see the shining glossy surface, right? The happy-go-lucky volunteers. I don't doubt that in any given population there are going to be people that aspire to be something greater, right? In a post-scarcity society, there will be people who simply are bored. and want to go and become the best cook ever, and Starfleet gives them the opportunity to, or they want to be the best miner, or even the best cleaner, right? A guy wants to be the best broom pusher in the entire galaxy, and he goes and he works on a starship as a broom pusher, right? I'm not talking any of the glamorous jobs, because those are jobs that people would definitely aspire to, like engineer or working on the bridge or working part of the maintenance or anything like that. Even just the broom pusher or the cook. There's going to be somebody who aspires to do that because they're just plain old bored out of their minds. What happens to those people who aren't bored out of their minds? Doing nothing. Because there's got to be like untold numbers of them, right? On these planets. Or is there some sort of secret dark population cull of the people who are useless? Is that the dark underbelly, Jeff, of the Federation? Is that there's a cull of the useless people?
So we have to kind of define useless, because...
So I'm just gonna interject really quick, if you don't mind.
I don't mind.
Okay.
I welcome you, BJ, to this discussion.
It's gonna give Jeff a chance to sort of gather his thoughts and give a proper answer, because I feel like we had this conversation before, and I'm just going to say what I think I said at the time, is that that particular type of information is a bit out of the purview of Star Trek. Like, I know Gary is into like the world building behind the scenes, but
at
some point there is world building that you don't really have to do because it doesn't really affect what's on the screen.
I'll grant that, BJ. You're right. They don't have to answer that question, so the question is never answered.
So my answer to this is that it can be a hard concept, because in our society, we live in a civilization where we depend on the civilization. Like, we don't have a few acres of land in the backyard to grow vegetables. We also don't have a factory that can build motherboards and processors and video cards and the latest models of cell phones. That has to be done in a factory far away. We don't have the luxury of self-sustainment in our society because of just the level of technology that we have. So as a recourse, we have to be contributors, because that's the way the collective works. There's just no other way to do it. And the thing about Star Trek, though, is their technology is such a way that individuals can at least take care of the basic necessities. They can do that independently. They can do it even without being an engineer or a great scientific expert. And they can even live in a community where that stuff is taken care of, and it probably only takes a minimal amount of effort to keep all those systems working. So they could be part of a colony, and the food provided in that colony doesn't take a lot of time to create it or anything like that. Once they got all their infrastructure set up in the colony, it's pretty low maintenance. So you don't need a lot of people to maintain it. And so they get up to other... So the people that you might call useless in some point of view, what do they do? And the answer is they probably do a lot of things with their free time that they want to do. They could study, they could learn, they could do art, they could do a lot of stuff. There's many things to do. They could just go into town and talk with someone at a cafe. There's just stuff. And the universe, the thing is there's a lot of content. There's one episode of TNG where the Enterprise gets blasted away to another part of the galaxy, and they meet an alien species that's extremely ancient, and they offload so much data from that species that when they get back to Earth, it would take scholars like years upon years just to kind of go through some of it. It's an enormous amount of content. So the Federation, in their exploration, they're gathering so much data And so there's just a never-ending waves of data coming in from Starfleet that the citizens of the Federation of any kind can, in fact, become scholars of. So the short answer, I would say, is that people in the Federation, they don't have to depend on society as much. Once you got that technology and infrastructure in place, you don't need a lot of things from society. So you can live a more independent life. You can even live independently on a planet on your own somewhere, or you can live in a society, and in that society, things are pretty well squared away in terms of technology. And so the only jobs there really are the most important ones to do. It's not like in our society where people have to have a job. So whether there's work to do or not, there's lots of jobs to do. And it's different. It's very different.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Old business.
I don't know if I really explained that very well, but go ahead.
I'm willing to accept that there is an explanation out there. Whether or not that is an acceptable explanation, I will table for further contemplation. Right?
Sure.
Let us move on from old business on to new business.
I'm going to interject one more time.
Okay.
So, just a note I wrote to myself so that I would not forget to say it. Gary?
Yes.
Just to be fair, there is another sci-fi property that you are a fan of, which is basically a empire powered by worm farms.
Yes. They don't hide their worm farms. The worm farms are out there for everyone to see.
Just throwing it out there.
Okay, which one is it? You got to give me the answer.
We're talking about Dune, Jeff.
Oh, yeah. Worm farms on Dune? They have giant sandworms.
Yes.
Yes, worms.
Worms make the spice, Jeff.
Okay. All right. Fair enough.
Spice is worm output, ergo worm farm.
It's 3D printed worm output. Okay.
It's actually, BJ, just so you understand, it's not quite worm poop. It's more of like a byproduct of worm of the worm life cycle process, if that makes any sense at all.
But it's like, yes, I know, but still, a massive interstellar empire is powered by worm byproduct.
Yes.
Just throwing it out there. Okay, carry on to new business.
New business.
New business. Jeff,
Have fun, kids.
I have, in the beginning of this movie. In the beginning of this movie, they're saying, they're quite proud of this. They're saying they're moving the Excelsior is chugging along at full impulse power, right? I have a question for you, because I was under the impression that impulse... Okay, so they talk about maneuvering thrusters in this movie. Maneuvering thrusters, because in space dock, you're only allowed to use maneuvering thrusters, not impulse. And Kirk, gives the young...
The order to put the metal...
gives the young lieutenant the eye, and she does the impulse power. But anyways, so maneuvering thrusters, impulse power, and then warp drive, right?
Yeah.
So the Excelsior in the beginning of the movie is chugging along at full impulse power, and it's not exactly saying why it's chugging along at full impulse power. So I was under the impression the impulse was like, you're not warp speed, right?
Yes.
So,
so they wouldn't be traveling.
Maneuvering thrusters would be like, so just kind of relatively, just like really low powered, just kind of move a little bit here and there, the kind of thing that you would use in a space dock to not crash into the walls. So, and then impulse is your like kind of sublight speed. It doesn't really say exactly what's pushing the ship along, though I'm gathering there's some sort of inertialess drive that's going on there. They're like warping space, but without actually warping, not going through, warp speed. And then there is warp speed, which, and it gives different warp levels, like warp 1, 2, 3, and 4. And I don't know exactly what it goes up to, though I thought at one time it said that they were up to warp 15. I'm not sure.
So there's a barrier at warp 10. They can't get past warp 10.
Okay.
But there are
episodes
where you approach warp 10, the laws of physics change in some way, that there's a barricade there, and if they do go past, there's adverse consequences. So they can go up to 9 point something at the very best.
So it's kind of like...
Once they hit warp 10, they enter the warp.
Yeah. They enter the warp, Jeff. If they go past warp 10, they enter... I could have sworn at some point they said they were going warp 15, but that's... Maybe I'm mistaken. I will grant that maybe
there
I'm
are
mistaken.
Episodes where they travel faster than warp 10, but it's not them that does it. It's due to some other alien that is better at science than them.
Yes. It is. Just call it what it is, BJ or Jeff. Just call it what it is. It's a demon, and they're doing magic. Okay. Yes.
Yep.
Anyways, so all right. I'm just kind of like wrapping my head around this to try to understand it a little bit better. The difference between impulse power. I'm guessing you're using impulse power in the star system, though you don't necessarily have to. There's nothing stopping you from going warp inside of a solar system, right?
They can use warp inside of a solar system, but they generally don't.
Apart from you might crash into something, and you don't want to crash into something at warp speed, right? Can you crash into stuff at warp speed?
Yeah.
And would it be bad? And how bad would it be?
It would be a crash. Like, they would...
i.e. object traveling at multiple speeds of light, crashing into another solid object, and it would be just bad.
Yes. In fact, when they fought the Borg, at the very last minute where it looked like they were going to lose the battle, Riker gave a command to execute Warp 1 straight into the Borg cube. So they weren't just going to ram it with impulse engines. They were going to hit the warp engines and warp into the cube, which probably would not have destroyed the cube because the cube regenerates, but it was their last-ditch effort to save the planet. But it fortunately didn't come to that.
Now, though also, isn't there... I have seen this one, and it's kind of interesting. I thought it was interesting. The Picard maneuver, is it called?
Yes, that is a warp maneuver where you warp straight to the very front of or straight up to the ship so that you're at very close range. And you use the warp engines for that.
Yeah, but I remember seeing it actually play out, and then I saw someone explain it because of the nature of light. It looks like the ship is far away, and then they use the warp engines to like maneuver the ship into they engage the warp drive for just like a split second, and then that puts you in it looks like there's two ships at the same time, one far away and one close up, even though the second one hasn't moved yet. That's just because of light hasn't traveled the distance.
You're actually going faster than the speed of light. From the point of view of the observer, it's traveling faster than the speed of light.
So
technically, it's warping, so it's not.
Yeah.
But yes.
Technically, it looks like there's two ships, but there's only one. So, yes. But yeah, I'm trying to wrap my head around it because it seemed inconsistent for a second in this, but that was only during the part, and I thought it was pretty nice in the movie where Sulu was traveling to meet up with this, and the ship, I don't know what speed they're going at, but but they're basically tearing the ship apart just to get it going as fast as they can. Sulu's Excelsior, getting it to go
to catch up to the Kittimer Accords, the meeting. They're trying to get there as quickly as they can. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the ship is rattling, and they're going beyond the recommended specs for the ship. Yeah. It's dramatic.
Yeah.
But yeah.
So I was just kind of curious about some of the technical aspects, and maybe it's just me scratching my head and mishearing some things. So I'll just leave it at that. I was just trying to wrap my head around some of the things.
Well, it's the impulse engines are just engines that are just moving the ship through space. They're just regular kinetic energy where it's just you're moving from one place to another. And then warp engines, you're actually creating a warp bubble. And so you're not traveling from one space to another, but you're changing the space around it so that the Enterprise can get there quicker. And the entire idea of space not being as strict and rigid as we observe it to be is a strange concept. But warp theory was around when the original writers were writing about the show, because they recognized that early science fiction doesn't recognize this, but space is incredibly huge. Like stars, they are really far apart. Even the fastest thing in the universe, light, takes so long to get from star to star. There's just no way you could conventionally travel between solar systems. So warp theory is where you have to go. You have to come up with some other method of traveling.
There has to be some form of faster than light travel that is developed to get from point A to point B, unless you have another. Unless you're limited by it. I know, and generally science fiction doesn't go into this. They usually solve it by saying techno wizard invents faster than light travel, and they call it that. But some go with the concepts of. I know the generation ship is one. Are you familiar with that, Jeff?
Generations? Generation ship?
Generation ship. Are you familiar with that?
No, I don't know. Which sci-fi are we talking about?
I don't know exactly what science fiction uses it, but that's more of like they call it a generation ship because it takes hundreds of years. Like this is slower than light travel, right? And so,
so you have many generations on the ship while you're traveling to a distant place.
Yes. Yeah. So it's like you're going to go in the ship and your great-grandkids are going to come out the other end, and hopefully the system that you're going to is viable. Otherwise, you're going to kind of have a bad day.
Yeah.
But then again, if you have the technology to build said generation ship, you're probably going to be able to survive, you're probably going to be able to survive in space for long periods of time. So generation ship should, if nothing else, the generation ship will become the place where they will live once they get to their new home system, and they'll just live in space from there. But anyways.
Yeah, that would work. Now, the thing about this universe is that the Klingons and the Federation and the Romulans, they're actually somewhat close to each other.
Yes.
So one of the reasons why they warp around to the neutral zone and then they warp over to the Klingon space and all that, those are somewhat close to each other. The Klingons and the humans first met each other before the time of Kirk and Spock. They ran into each other. It wasn't long before the Klingons and the humans had this major war, because when you meet the Klingons, it's not long before you offend them, and then next thing you know, there's a war. So there was a terrible war, and then they created a peace negotiation where they created a neutral zone where neither side was allowed to cross the neutral zone, which creates a buffer so it becomes harder to do a surprise attack. which is what the neutral zone is all about, which is a similar story to the Romulans. The Romulans and the Klingons have a similar backstory, where they're an alien race that, as they're out exploring, they run into a group of aliens that is not friendly at all, and they have a terrible war, and they just declare a peace with an imperfect yet sustainable peace agreement.
So I got a question though. So the neutral zone, is it the same neutral zone for the Romulans and the Klingons and the humans? Is it kind of like this weird triangular area? Or
no,
is it like
they're two separate neutral zones.
Two separate neutral zones, or more specifically, three separate. One for the Romulans, one between the Romulans and the Klingons, one between Romulans and humans, one between humans and Klingons, and you know what I mean. So three distinct separate.
I would count two. So
so are the humans between the Romulans and the Klingons, or is it the Klingons between the Romulans and the humans?
So they're the borders between Klingons and humans and Romulans and the Federation and humans. Those are two separate borders. So there is a neutral zone, a space as the neutral zone between those two.
I mean, what I'm asking is, and this one, and BJ, I don't know if this one can quite be hand waved away of they just don't want to explain it. It has somebody actually drawn a map. A star
map. There are maps, but I don't think they're official canon. But there are books with maps.
I'm just wondering if someone officially canon has drawn a map and said who is where, right? Because otherwise we're just kind of left guessing of what space is, and this is also saying that, okay, the space is three-dimensional. It's not two-dimensional. So
yes, and the neutral zone is three-dimensional.
Yes, the neutral zone is three-dimensional. So you got three empires kind of bordering each other. Now, do they each border each other? Do all three of them share borders with each other, or is one of them in between the two others? That's what I'm asking, Jeff.
All three of them share borders with each other. So you can think of it kind of like as a loose, kind of like a triangular type situation. So I guess there are I don't know if the Romulans and Klingons have a neutral zone. They are bitter enemies, and they get into plenty of wars between the two of them. But there's never discussed a neutral zone agreement that the two of them have, like the Federation. The Federation is good with peace negotiations. They do it a lot. So they have sophisticated treaties.
Though it does seem like in this movie, the Federation is more than willing to throw down, or at least aspects of it. The certain elements
part of the theme.
The Federation are more than willing to throw down and see who comes out on top.
Yeah, actually, that's part of the theme of this show, is that there's this enormous change happening. The Klingons had a bit of an accident. They accidentally blew up one of their own moons. It happened, which kind of is reminiscent, because I know in the 80s Chernobyl happened, so there's some echoing of real history here, just as an echo. But the Klingons have this problem. Their civilization is collapsing. It doesn't turn out that way, but from this moment in time, it seems to be that that's what's going to happen.
They're putting too much resources into weapons industry and not enough resources into sustainment of their long-term sustainment of their manufacturing or what's infrastructure. Long-term sustainment of their infrastructure. They don't have enough resources in infrastructure or sustainment. It's all going into
they overextend themselves.
Yes.
And it fires back on them in a terrible way. So they have this huge tragedy, and now because of that, the Klingons for the first time are thinking of doing something that they never would ever want to do, which is to make an agreement with the Federation. So there's one border that they don't have to worry about. There's one enemy out there that they don't have to worry about. It makes their defensive situation less overextended. So they're being forced to make a more conservative decision. And the Klingons hate it. They're divided, and they show scenes of that where some of the Klingons don't want any agreement with the Federation. They don't trust them. They don't like them. They don't like their way of life. They're against what the Federation is.
Because the Klingons expect to get paid for their work.
The Klingons operate differently than the Federation. The Klingons are a very hierarchical society that is also kind of a loose confederation. In Klingon society, you are loyal to whoever your master is, whoever's in charge. And so, like in a Klingon crew, the crew isn't loyal to the Klingon regulations. They're loyal to the captain. That captain is loyal to whoever he's under. And so eventually there's these different houses within the Klingon Empire, and they have a number of ships and colonies and things that they are over in terms of their hierarchy. And they usually get along. So it's different than other societies where things are very organized. The Klingons are more loosely organized, and they're not as cooperative. They can decide whether or not they follow the council or not. They have a lot of rules and traditions but they're not obligated to follow those. They follow those sheerly out of respect for their society and their traditions.
And getting paid. People follow.
As far as money, they don't talk about money really being used much in Klingons, but they do have money in the Klingon Empire. But Klingons are not really, it's not like they have a stock market of any kind. They're not hugely focused on the trade. In fact, there's an episode where a Ferengi goes in and he's explaining the monetary transactions of one of the Klingons and how the Klingon was siphoning money. And the Klingons can't even sit through the lecture. They're like, no, we are not listening to financial stuff. Just tell us, are you going to fight the guy because he dishonored you? It's yeah, so the Klingons are different.
Supposedly being the alien culture, I understand them more than the Federation.
So they don't like the Federation, they don't trust the Federation, and they see the Federation as just, on the outside, it's this loving, everybody is important, let's all get along and be peaceful and share technology. On the outside, that's what it is. But they see on the inside, it's humans taking dominion and control over other species. That's what the Klingons see. And they have a comment for that at the dinner.
Yes.
Where the girl, the prince, yeah.
Okay,
go ahead.
Okay. I have a question. So they make the comment that it is a human-centered society, right?
Yeah.
And I fully grant that it does seem like from the outside that the humans are the dominant species inside of that. That is a little bit of a pot calling kettle black, because in the Klingon Empire, isn't it, the Klingons in charge?
The Klingons are actually in charge. Yeah.
Yes, and they don't even try to hide it. So I do think that the lady judges a little bit. Maybe she needs to do some self-reflection upon her own empire before she goes pointing fingers at the humans. But
That's too much.
Yeah. But the other one is when they go to the Federation has an elected president, right? And that guy is that a human?
He's not human. He might be like half human or something.
He's got like a weird forehead and kind of odd golden hair. And
yeah, he's not human.
Glasses that doesn't seem like... Yeah, he's an alien.
He's from one of the many planets that are in the Federation.
And he seems to be somebody, an elected official who's in charge of the Federation that is not human. I wonder if in the Klingon Empire is there a non-Klingon in a position of significant power? I don't think so.
No.
I don't think that happens in the Romulan Empire either. So I'm just
The
wondering.
Klingons do show up. Well, so how that works as far as like authority over other worlds.
Yes.
The Federation doesn't do it. You can join the Federation and be part of their happy little community. But the Klingons and the Romulans are different in that the Romulans will just take over a species and they will subjugate them.
Mhm.
But they don't show a lot of that. And the Klingons will show up and sometimes enforce trade agreements that are unfair, but they don't do a lot of occupation of planets. And sometimes they will even show up and do trade agreements with a planet, and the Federation will also want to do the same thing, and there'll be a conflict between the two. And from the point of view of the Federation, the Klingons are often unfair with the people that they trade with. They don't show a lot of that, but there are a few episodes in the original series where the Klingons are, they go to a planet and they introduce a lot of weapons to those people, and they do whatever it takes in order to gain control over it. The thing about the Klingons that's different, the reason why they think differently, is they believe in their system of values. They believe that strength is the most important value, whereas humans don't believe that. They believe that cooperation is more important. They believe in other things. So to a Klingon, if you walk into a room and you might be a good person, but you don't have strength of character, of like, you're not mentally strong or you're not physically strong or any of those things, they devalue you. That's the thing about the Klingons do not like the Federation because it is an opposing set of values that offends them. That's probably fundamentally what it is. And so they don't like how the Federation is growing. The Romulans hate this too. The Federation is growing in popularity because people like to be a part of it. They join it and they prosper with all that sharing of ideas and technology and protection and other things. The Federation is prospering rather well, and the Romulans hate it. By the time you get to the TNG series, the Romulans have had enough, and they're like, we're tired of you being so successful. We're now going to show up more often. We did a review on that episode. And the Klingons don't like it and find it threatening. But that's probably, they find it threatening partially because of their own faults. It's just kind of a difference of culture. And so this movie puts us in the place where you have these two cultures that can't really coexist very well because of how different they are. And how now there's an opportunity for them to become more trusting of each other, and how there's a lot of people who resist that idea.
So,
go ahead.
Okay. Moving on to something else. I did have a question, because we see some very familiar faces in this movie. At least two of them that I know of. Right? Though these characters they don't show up later, right? In other series or seasons or whatever. But the actors these two actors show up. At least one of them as the same species in both as both characters. And you know who I'm talking about, right?
Not really.
So the lawyer who's representing Kirk.
Oh, yeah.
Is that Michael Dorn? Is that it?
Yeah.
Yeah. He later plays Worf. So in both instances, he's a Klingon, right?
In this movie, he's Worf's grandfather.
Okay, so he is canonically Worf's grandfather.
Yep.
Is that true, or is that
Yes.
just something that you heard? Or okay. So canonically, he is Worf's grandfather. I guess that makes sense. That Worf's grandfather, or the grandson of this man who was willing to defend humans in a trial, would eventually join Starfleet. Okay,
Yeah,
that makes
Worf's
sense.
family is a very unique family in the Klingon Empire.
Yes.
They're very, they think differently. They're very unique. Other Klingons are not quite like them. But at the
So,
same time, they're still very Klingon. Go ahead.
because I remember there's a different science fiction series, Larry Niven's Known Space series. In that series, there's this series of events referred to as the Man-Kazin Wars, and humans, that is humans, fight a kind of a similar, warlike species, the Kazin, right? And the Kazin are, uh, through the course of 5 interstellar wars, eventually the Kazin come to the conclusion that it is a dumb idea to fight humans. Because every time the humans kick their butts, are sitting there, they never initiate the fight, they always are on the defense, but every time there's a little bit more of the Kzinti Empire that is annexed by the humans at the end of every one of the wars, right? So the Kzinti, after 5 wars, decide maybe it's not the smartest idea to fight the humans. Now, at the end of the Man-Kazin Wars, there's an interesting event happens in which Kzinti, a small group of Kzinti, and they're outcast from the rest of Kazin society because of what they do. What they do is they convert to human religion because they believe that God, because they believe in a God just the same as we do, but they believe that God made man in his own image. Now that's interesting for a alien species to believe that, the supreme being that is, the creator of all of the universe would create another species, not your own, in his own image. So it's kind of interesting. So I kind of I think of Worf and his family in that way. Maybe not that extreme, but in that way. Is that off the mark, Jeff?
I guess so. I don't know what else to add from that. But yeah, they're a slightly different than most Klingon families.
More than
Which is
willing to speak to humans.
Well, I could be wrong, and Jeff, correct me if I am. But isn't Worf raised by humans?
Yes. So the story of Worf is that he's from Khitomer, the same planet in this movie. Khitomer is a Klingon colony that's very prosperous, very powerful. And the Romulans managed to destroy it. So when Worf was a little kid, very little, the Romulans had a scheme, because Romulans are tricksters. They don't just show up and fight. They basically have an elaborate plan to make the fight easy for them. And so they somehow were able to deactivate the defenses of the planet using Klingons who double-crossed their own civilization. And they destroyed Khitomer, killed Worf's father. Worf and another woman that was a caretaker of his managed to survive. Worf comes from an extremely wealthy and prominent Klingon family, one of the top families of the Klingon Empire. Because remember, the Klingons are divided up into rich houses. Mm-hmm. And so he's from one of these great houses. They rescue him and they raise him. And this is kind of before this treaty from this movie really wasn't the full peace agreement. This was really the beginning of many peace agreements that slowly over time, the two civilizations became more and more trusting and eventually became almost like allies. By the time you get to TNG, the Klingons and the humans, they're still culturally different and still clash culturally, but they're not enemies. And they even help each other out sometimes. And they have a much better relationship.
More friendly.
However, they still get nervous when a Klingon ship comes by. that's a separate discussion. The point is yes, before I digress into too many tangents, yeah, he was raised by human parents, but he would sometimes leave and spend time with Klingon families. There was one time where he visited the Klingon world and other things like that. He had no family, and so humans gave him a family and such. But yeah, the reasons why he wasn't able to they couldn't just hand him over to a group of Klingons is a little bit unknown. I don't fully know the answer to that, but I suspect that the treaty took a little while for it to fully take into effect. One of the reasons why the peace between the humans and Klingons did so well is because at Khitomer there were Federation ships that showed up and tried to help to defend the colony against the Romulans, and they lost. The Romulans won the day. They destroyed the Federation ships, destroyed the Klingon colony. It was a complete victory for the Romulans. So, but there were a few survivors, and Worf was one of them. And later Federation ships showed up to try and help after the battle was over, and they were able to rescue those survivors. And that battle was one of the reasons why the Klingons further started to respect the Federation. Because the Klingons will not respect the Federation if they show up with a smile on their face and a friendly handshake and say, we want to be friends. They don't respect that. But if the humans can show grit and bravery in battle, then the Klingons can respect that. They can say, okay, maybe these people aren't the marshmallows we thought they were. So that's kind of the thing.
So the other actor that I recognized was, I don't know his name, but I know he was an actor, or he played a character in Deep Space Nine. I think his name was Odo or something like that. He was a shapeshifter.
Renee something.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, he's one of the people giving a briefing. Is that?
Yeah.
No.
And then
okay.
he's the one who disguises himself as a Klingon to try to be a sniper at the conference.
Yeah.
He's yes.
So the series reuses actors a lot.
Yeah.
They just put masks on them. and then sometimes they just use them for different parts and they won't even put a mask on.
So
there's a lot of that happens.
Yeah, I and maybe there might even be more. I don't know. If you look through all of them, you might recognize some more of them. But those were the two that showed up the most for me. Mostly the Michael Dorn one, because it's like, okay, yeah, he looks pretty much spot on to his Next Generation character. That might be the reason why he was chosen as that character later. This movie was made before.
This movie
Next
was made
right?
during TNG.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't know that.
Yeah, from what I read, they actually reused some of the TNG sets.
Okay.
So
that makes sense. All right. So, I don't really have anything else. Old business has been conducted. New business has been conducted. I don't really have anything else to discuss upon this matter. It was a generally enjoyable movie.
Had a lot of Shakespeare in it.
A lot of Shakespeare. For a species that apparently doesn't like humans or human culture, they were really quoting a lot of Shakespeare.
That was going to be one of my comments, is that this bad guy dislikes humans and the Federation so much that he's willing to assassinate his own people, and yet like 75% of his dialogue is Shakespeare quotes.
He likes it ironically.
It's an awful lot of quoting for ironic liking.
Well, you can admire something that you also disagree with fundamentally. I think that's part of the interesting part of his character, is that he quotes so much Shakespeare, which is that he even says Shakespeare's much better when you read it in the Klingon translation.
No.
Oh.
The specific quote, Jeff, is
Yeah.
when you read it in the original Klingon.
Yeah.
I.e., he's like trying to say that Shakespeare was actually Klingon and not human. Though, which is kind of funny.
I didn't get that, but
No,
okay.
No, they totally say that, Jeff.
They do.
It was probably
Okay.
more.
Well, I
There's
don't
probably-
interpret it that way, but that's fine.
Well, yeah, they say that. In my opinion, it was probably more of a dig than, oh yeah, Shakespeare was Klingon. It was probably more of a dig, a
Yeah.
sort of a backhanded compliment, or
Or
what
it
have you.
could be that it's been several hundred years and maybe the Klingons, maybe this group of Klingons thought Shakespeare actually was Klingon.
maybe,
Possibly.
Could
That's-
possibly be.
possibly. That's not how I read it, but sure, it's possible.
I mean, and BJ, you've got to admit that especially the way Jeff is describing current Federation, like society, Shakespeare is a lot, his culture and values are a lot closer to what Jeff is describing the Klingon society is. So
Yeah. I mean,
it just
medieval Europe might have more in common
medieval
with the
has
Klingons.
a lot more in common with the Klingons than modern Federation society. So it just maybe
Speaking of which,
there's a reason why the Klingons would say that Shakespeare is Klingon.
Speaking of which, that reminds me. While the guys were talking, I did try to look up some maps of the Star Trek universe online, and there does not seem to be any kind of what's the word? Any kind of definite answer if there's a neutral zone between the Klingons and the Romulans. Some maps show one, some maps don't.
Yeah, and probably none of those maps are really officially canon, but they're all good though. They're all writers selling books, making up details, and they're probably well intended.
They all generally agree on like locations and like general outlay, but yeah, some show the Romulan Empire being completely surrounded by a neutral zone. Some just some show it as just on the border between the Romulans and the Federation. So
Yeah.
I do not know if there is a concrete answer on that.
So one of the things that confused me as a kid when I watched Star Trek is how the Klingons keep going back and forth between being enemies and friends. And I think part of that is what I already mentioned to some extent. But Klingon warriors are not following their state. Like, how do I describe it? Like a Federation officer is not going to start a war with another culture. They're not going to do that. If their captain orders them to do something wrong, they're going to say, oh, there's some regulation that says we can't do that, Captain. And it's going to be a different interaction. Whereas Federation officers, they follow regulation, they follow rules, they do all these things by the book. A Starfleet captain follows procedures, all
Unless
that
you're Kirk.
stuff. Yes, except for Kirk, who is a rule breaker among the humans. But Klingons are different. In a Klingon ship, the crew obeys the captain. If the captain says we're going to do something, there is no regulation that says, but captain, we can't do that. Now, if the captain is perceived as weak or unable to do his job, the other officers can actually take over the ship and kill him and then take over command. They can do that, and that's okay within Klingon society. It's not considered a mutiny. It's considered doing the right thing for the ship. And if the crew gets killed in that process because the captain is a better fighter, then that's considered okay in Klingon society. And that's one of the reasons, the episode we didn't watch that we'll probably never review because we won't have time, but the Search for Spock. The weird thing about that is you have a Klingon ship that without orders attacks Federation ships.
The one weird thing about the Search for Spock.
Yeah, one weird thing. And in Klingon society, that's acceptable because the Klingon crew, when the captain says, we're going to attack this target, even though we're not at war, the crew is loyal to the captain. As long as he maintains command and control of his ship, they're going to follow him. And they're going to obey him despite how wrong those decisions might be within the Klingon Empire. So loyalty is different among the Klingons. So you have episodes that, even though they have a good relationship with the Klingon Empire, they also have to consider the possibility that they may not have a good relation with one particular captain on one ship. So there's episodes in TNG where a Klingon ship shows up and their red alert goes on. You know, they have a good relationship with the Klingons, but they don't always know whether this one Klingon is in a good mood or not. That's kind of the thing. There's, even though they have these treaties, there's still some precariousness to this very aggressive species. Anyway, I wanted to make that point.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
All right.
So, BJ, what did you think? What did you think of the movie? You have to add something.
I brought up a couple of things here and there. If you want to know what I think about the movie, go listen to our review. That's what the reviews are for.
Okay.
I think we have been at this for over an hour.
Yeah.
This week, the part of Gary will be
We've done
played
our
by
bid
BJ.
for King and Country.
No, I already said I'm done. So I said my piece. So
Okay.
Yeah.
See,
Obviously,
join us to see how long it takes for Jeff to make us watch another Star Trek thing.
Yes,
I'm
indeed.
BJ. With me is Jeff and Gary. Stay tuned to see if the intervention worked. We'll see you next time for when we talk about something, I'm sure. See you then, folks. Bye-bye.